Second. Okay, we should be live on YouTube now, so people can start coming in.
Okay, cool.
And I'll pull us up on Zoom so folks can start coming in here too. And start webinar. Ta-da! So now folks can start coming in.
You have to manually let people in, or does it?
No, as soon as I go live, then they
Gotcha.
go from the waiting room and come in.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so if you watch the participants number, it starts rolling up now.
Rolling, yeah, okay.
And then we won't see how many people, if you're in YouTube, you'll see how many people are in YouTube. And if you're in Zoom, you see how many people are in Zoom. So. So for those people who are here right off the bat, Alex, did you want to tell the egg story?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I was encouraged to tell this story about this conversation I had the other day. I have a friend who lives in the UK, and years ago, his mother was involved with some captive barn owl breeding and reintroduction efforts, and he was telling me that the barn owls that he had in his backyard just would continuously lay eggs, and so many eggs that they couldn't keep up with it, didn't have enough room in the incubator, etc. And they had so many eggs that his mother actually would cook with them and incorporate them into her baking. He said they taste just like a chicken egg. Nothing different at all.
Yikes.
Yeah.
I think Alexander Rulon mentioned something in his book that that barn owl eggs have relatively small yolks, and that's why incubation period is long and development is long in the nest. That they don't have the ability to pack in a lot of fat, so their yolks are relatively small. So comparatively to a chicken, it probably had an awful lot of white and very little yolk. So
Good. Well, it's like more egg whites, right?
yeah,
So it's good for you.
High protein.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's odd stories out there. And for anybody who knows Ruar Solheim, he's kind of a crazy Norwegian guy. And I believe he has tried Eurasian eagle owl and snowy owl. Not eggs, the actual deceased. He did not kill them, but fresh killed. And
not great gray, huh?
No. So gross as far as great gray. Bob Nero, who studied them years and years ago, licked a pellet once to see what the mucus tastes like, and apparently the mucus is very sweet. And then apparently his protege Jim Duncan took it one step farther and bit into a pellet. Not good. Not good. So no. Don't bite pellets, just lick pellets.
We'll have to ask Jim about that.
Yeah, not going to encourage that. And then I think Kay McKeever, who ran the Owl Foundation up in Vineland, Ontario forever, she, I think at one time was married to somebody from Brazil, and she was down in Brazil and was unknown to her, served burrowing owl meat.
Wow.
She said it was fine, but it was absolutely not worth killing a burrowing owl.
Burrowing owl for. No.
Yeah. And then at the Bell Museum at the University of Minnesota, we were getting some data on great horned owl skeletal material. And I'm copying down the data from the labels. And on one of the labels at the end, I mean, it must have been a grad student that prepared it. It said, ate it, tasted good.
Oh, no kidding.
Needless to say, we are not condoning eating owls or owl eggs, but
right.
There are crazy people out there, and some of them are owl researchers.
The guy I used to work for used to always say, "You haven't studied it till you've eaten it." So
Ew.
But his birds were game birds. You could eat soras legally.
Yeah.
So
Can you eat soras legally? I didn't
you
realize they
sure
were
can.
endangered.
Yeah. You go through kind of you have these flat bottom canoes and you kind of pull through the marsh and flush them out of the cattails and then they jump up and like quail hunting or something, with a shotgun. So it's not very popular and really nobody does it at all anymore, but it is still legal.
I would think a marsh bird would not taste that good.
Mm.
Yeah. I wouldn't either.
But their diet is almost entirely wild rice. So
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
interesting. Well, at least it's not fishy then.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, not. Well, I guess they will eat fish sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah. Lots of seeds though.
Well, this has been a very entertaining
Intro
to the program. So this is why everybody should join the programs right off the bat, so you get the crazy fun. Okay, well, hopefully we've got most of our folks here now. When I checked earlier today, we had people registered from 22 countries and 44 US states. So we've got a really broad audience for this presentation. And just a little background, if some people haven't joined us before for any of our virtual OWL expert speaker series, I'm Carla Bloom from the International OWL Center, which is located in the sprawling metropolis of Houston, Minnesota, with less than 1,000 people in it, way in the little toe of Minnesota next to Wisconsin and Iowa. We operate out of an old storefront for now, working on a capital campaign to build what we should have. So we have 4.5 acres in a park at the edge of town where we will be building. So in the meantime, we don't have a nice place to do webinars from. So thankfully, Owl City Cycles, which is across the street from the Owl Center, is closed in the winter, and they're letting us use this for webinars. So hence the cool owl gear around here. They've got all kinds of cool owl stuff. So it's a fun place to do a webinar from. So thanks to Andy and Alex for doing this webinar for us, because I think this is a very popular one because barn owls are kind of all over the place. And those of us in northern parts of North America, they're not that common. What can we do to help them? So thanks for doing this. Thanks to everybody that's joining us and wants to learn more. And especially thanks to those of you who made donations to help support this series, because keeping it free is awesome. So everybody who wants to learn has that chance to learn more about all the different topics that we have directly from the experts. And that's the cool part is, when else do you get to talk to the researchers directly and ask them questions and learn from them directly? So I always love this series because I'm always learning something. And thank you to our chat room moderators that we have over on our YouTube channel. These are some of our volunteers, and Tristan Williams from the Scottish Owl Center helps us out too over there. So they'll make sure that things stay on topic and forward questions from there over here. So even if you're in YouTube, your questions can still be addressed. Some logistics of how we're going to run this. If you're watching us on Zoom, the chat is turned off, and then just ask your questions in the Q&A. If you're watching us on YouTube, the chat obviously is going, so please keep it on topic. And if you have questions, you can just ask it in the chat, and one of our moderators will get those questions over to us so they can get directed to Andy and Alex. Just a little bit of background on Andy first. So Andy is with the Maryland, well, they're both with the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership, the Farmland Raptor program. And Andy is a retired senior naturalist at Calvert County Natural Resources Division. Got his first sub-permittee for bird banding when he was only 16 years old. So he's been doing this a while, and he started studying barn owls back in the 1990s before Alex was born. So Alex has come into this more recently after he met Andy and kind of got sucked into things. So Alex has been working with barn owls now for around 3 years, but he's also worked with soras and ospreys and still is working with osprey. So with that, I will turn it over to Andy and Alex. Thanks for being here.
All right, let me get this up here.
Very
There we
good.
go.
Thank you, Carla, for having us, inviting us to talk today. It's a great pleasure to talk about what we're doing in our neck of the woods. As you mentioned, we are Andy Brown and Alex Pellegrini, manager and coordinator of the Maryland Farmland Raptor program, which is an initiative of the Bird Conservation Partnership, a nonprofit 501(c)(3). We're going to talk to you today about our nest box program for American barn owls and American kestrels. So we're trying to bring barn owls and kestrels back to Maryland's working landscapes. We're going to kind of tag team this. I'm going to talk a little bit. Alex is going to talk a little bit, and then I'm going to talk a little more, and then Alex is going to wrap it up for us. But as Carla mentioned, I began working with barn owls in the late 1980s, early 1990s. As part of my position with Calvert County Natural Resources Division. I was working with barn owls along the Patuxent River Valley in southern Maryland, putting up nest boxes and monitoring and banding chicks. So where is southern Maryland, and where is Maryland, in fact? So Maryland is considered one of the mid-Atlantic states along the eastern seaboard of the United States. It's a very unique state because it's essentially divided into half by the Chesapeake Bay. On the eastern side of the Chesapeake Bay is a large peninsula referred to as the Delmarva. It's made up of 3 different states: Delaware, Maryland, and part of Virginia. And then to the west, on the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay, is the remainder of Maryland, starting out with a little bit of coastal plain in the southern part of the state, moving into a large section of Piedmont area in central Maryland, and then way out in the far western reaches are the Appalachian Mountains, the Ridge and Valley, and the Cumberland Plateau. So in 2000, the federal government started offering grant funds, part of the state and tribal wildlife grant program for different states and tribal lands to conduct some research on some of the wildlife that they wanted to. And it was so popular that in 2005, Congress mandated that for any state to apply for this grant money, they needed to produce something called a state wildlife action plan. And this state wildlife action plan was designated to identify all of the species of wildlife within your state that were in greatest need of conservation. So everything from plants all the way up to the grizzly bears are listed in the state wildlife action plans. They require that these action plans be updated every 10 years. So in 2015, the action plan was updated, and a year following, the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership was formed. It's a nonprofit 501(c)(3) designed to create these partnerships between state government, federal agencies, and nonprofits to promote the conservation efforts of bird species that were listed in this state wildlife action plan. So in 2018, I started working with David Johnson on some of his burrowing owl activities that he was doing in Oregon. And one of the goals that David had on those burrowing owls was to review the taxonomy of this species. And he encouraged me to start looking at barn owls in my area the same way. So I organized a meeting with 4 different counties along the Patuxent River Valley there in southern Maryland, where we had nest boxes, and put together some conservation goals for what we wanted to do with barn owls along the Patuxent. Interestingly, the executive director of the Maryland Bird Conservation Partnership attended that meeting and asked if MBCP could adopt these same conservation goals on a statewide level, and we actually formed the Maryland Farmland Raptor program in 2019. Some of these goals include, kind of in a nutshell, to gain a better understanding of the ecology of farmland raptors in Maryland, by obtaining a baseline about on their statewide abundance, identifying those critical habitats where they thrive, ensure adequate and consistent monitoring of that population. Includes citizen participation, engage the public, and be a principal gateway for all of the information about the nesting of these farmland raptors in one collective site. We identified 4 target species that were listed in the State Wildlife Action Plan: 2 owls and two hawks, American barn owl and the short-eared owl, and the American kestrel and the northern harrier as our focal species.
So we'll only talk about barn owls and kestrels today. But since, this is the International Owl Center, and in that spirit, we'll start here with barn owls. But before we get into barn owls specifically, I like to start from the beginning. So I like to go way back and, just think about owls more generally. And this isn't really taxonomy 101 that I'll do quickly. I don't think this is probably an audience that needs that, but this is a short taxonomy inspired tangent here. So all owls, they belong to the order Strigiformes. And that name, it actually comes from the Latin strix, but in ancient Roman folklore, strix wasn't really an owl in the biological sense. It was this night flying owl-like creature. It's often described as a witch. Stories about it feeding on human blood, and apparently especially the blood of infants. So right from the beginning, owls have a bit of a dark reputation. And that reputation, it doesn't just exist in Roman mythology. We find it across time and cultures that owls aren't always cast as the good guys. And I want to set the scene here to introduce barn owls. So imagine this. You're walking into a barn at night. This is before electricity. So you have your candlelight. You're not expecting anything. You're going to check on your pigs or something like that in the barn. And all of a sudden you hear something above you, and you look up with your candlelight and you see this. And I mean, I would say, that these guys, barn owl chicks, really have the face that only a mother can love, or, maybe all owl lovers like us. But when I show people this picture and pictures of barn owl chicks, we always end up talking about how this is the reason that, people might think aliens exist. So you can see the inspiration for the stories that I was alluding to. And, just for the cherry on top here, this is what the vocalization sounds like, in that candlelight. And we've all probably heard barn owls before, but they have these banshee-like screams. So hopefully you could all hear that, but you put all this together and, this folklore starts to make a little more sense. And while these vocalizations are unsettling, this isn't really the point here. These vocalizations, they're also a clue. And, for a long time, owls are just owls in people's minds. They're grouped together by these obvious traits, right? Big flat faces, nocturnal habits, these predatory behaviors. But as people started paying closer attention to anatomy and behavior and these vocalizations, this picture, it starts to get a little bit clearer that owls aren't just owls. And nowadays we have these 2 families of owls within, and we have Strigidae and we have Titonidae. We're not going to worry about Strigidae today. Instead, we're just going to focus on Titonidae. And, I know we have an international audience here, but if you're from the United States like I am, you probably don't recognize any of these Titonidae species. You might not, unless you're a serious bird nerd, owl nerd. But that's okay. We're just going to focus on the barn owl. And here we go with another tangent. And I mentioned ancient lineage of owls, and this is where my ADHD brain starts to wander a bit. And I start to think about ancient owls. And for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to talk about ancient Taito, but we'll call them these Miocene barn owls. And this is one that I picked out that I think is especially fascinating. And I assume some of you, maybe all of you, have heard of this concept of island gigantism or Foster's rule. But just in case, this is the idea when mainland animals colonize islands, and these small species, they tend to evolve larger bodies, and larger species tend to evolve smaller bodies. And with no evolutionary pressure to hide from predators, combined with more food available than they need, these small animals, they grow in size. So you get these ancient barn owls the size of a fire hydrant. And in the Miocene, the Allen effect, it resulted in these guys, and they were these giant cave-dwelling barn owls. They were in Europe and in the Antilles. And most interestingly, when you start to look at diet, so some of the evidence that's been put together by these paleoornithologists, you really start to get the sense of how big these guys were. So we might recognize, lesser white-fronted geese here, pied avocets, the bones have been found, giant gildridaes, which are these giant dormice. In the Antilles, they liked these hutias apparently. But most interestingly, when I was going down this rabbit hole, I read this one document from this paleoornithologist who was speculating that at the same time that these giant barn owls existed in Sicily, there were also these dwarf elephants here. And he said that, it's completely capable. These giant barn owls, a large female would have been completely capable of taking one of these runty dwarf elephants. Now, this is just something cool to think about. It just absolutely blew my mind, so I couldn't help but share it. But, thinking about these barn owls on islands, they didn't originate on these islands. They spread there. So the question becomes, where did they come from? And we won't get too into the weeds here and discuss points of origin. That's not the takeaway from this map. The takeaway here is that barn owls spread across the globe, and well, they are found across the globe. They're found on every continent except Antarctica. Barn owls are cosmopolitan species, but that statement really depends on when you're making it and who you ask. So I should really say that the barn owl complex is cosmopolitan. And until recently, the taxonomic authority most relevant for us, Andy and I, the American Ornithological Society, actually defined the barn owl as a single species. So this is what that range map looked like. But recently, they were split into 3 species. So now that range map looks a little bit like this. So in green here, we have the American barn owl, in blue, the Western, and in red, the Eastern. Now, this is an example that was taken of some museum specimens that we got our hands on. And you can see here that Taito fricata, the American barn owl, it's huge, especially compared to Alba, the Western barn owl. And Javanica is, in the middle there. Now, there is some overlap, but why does this matter, right? Who cares if they're different sizes? Why does taxonomy matter? And taxonomy matters a great deal. Having a clarified taxonomy, it contributes to the level of conservation effort that's allotted to a species. So if the IUCN recognizes the barn owl as a single species, that global status can mask these very different population trajectories at smaller scales. And one of the ways that this split has been teased apart is through morphometric work using museum collections. So I'm going to hand it back to Andy there. He's already kind of mentioned that he did this work, that I got to help out a little bit as well. But this work with museum specimens has helped inform and in this case resolve these taxonomic questions in part.
Great. So I mentioned earlier that, I was working a little bit with David Johnson and the taxonomic review of the burrowing owl that he's just about wrapping up right now, which is pretty awesome. And he encouraged me to do something very similar with barn owls. There was a petition set forth to AOS I think it was probably 2018, 2019, somewhere in that area, that based on genetic findings supported the separation that Alex mentioned earlier into the 3 different species. But that petition was rejected, and it was stated that there needed more information to accompany that morphology and vocalization. So I got started measuring museum specimens from all over the U.S. and capturing adult barn owls to take these morphological measurements. We partnered with Rachel Doherty from the University of Walla Walla, and we measured 1,200. More than 1,200 museum specimens and over 200 adult live barn owls throughout our 2-year stint of capturing these guys. We looked at work from other researchers from around the world who were separating species, doing speciation work, and use them their methods as a guide. Some of the things we found were applicable, others were not. Rictal bristle, for example, on the face really wasn't much of a metric. So we kind of adjusted a little bit. We took tarsus measurements, halix measurements, Coleman. But what was most significant were the measurements of the wings. So we did wing area. We did what was called primary shortfall, with the difference in measurements between the longest primary and all of the other consecutive primary feathers, wing area, aspect ratio, those sort of things. I created this trap, a patio trap, which was an adaptation of one that David Johnson made for Aleph to capture scops owls in Turkey, and I kind of adapted that design to where it would hook on the front of a box. You can see the center picture here. The back of it has screen hardware cloth, so that the parent birds can still see and hear the chicks inside the nest box. It has a treadle plate and a guillotine style door that falls when the owl touches the plate. And it hangs on the front of the nest box by that threaded rod on the back. Here's a shot of the trap hanging on one of our nest boxes. You notice there's a line there. That is actually a speaker wire, electrical wire, attached to the upright where the trap door falls is a small switch, and on the other end is an LED light that we can place in a prominent place, either on the barn or on a stake out in the field or something of that nature. We can sit, a good 300-400 yards away from the nest box and be undetectable. Well, we think we're undetectable, but it doesn't seem to disturb the owls going into the trap to deliver food to the chicks. And when they go in, the door falls and the light comes on, and we know we've caught an owl. It's been quite successful, actually. We've done right now we're up to close to 100 adult barn owls just in the state of Maryland using the trap method. So this is a short little video of how we capture the bird and get it out of the trap. And so Alex, go ahead and give it a run. So Melissa, you want to come manage the box? So the trap is lowered down by a rope, and the female in this case is inside. We'll reach in and pull her out, box her up, hoist the trap back up, reset it for dad, and then take mom away and do our processing. So Rachel crunched all the data that we had that we collected on these museum specimens and these live birds, and you can see there was a very significant separation, particularly in the wing morphology. of the barn owl species specimens that we measured. So that's pretty significant. She has just recently published her work in Zootaxa. Should be coming out in the next issue. So let's talk a little bit about barn owls and their distribution across North America, across the United States. This is a fantastic slide that shows pretty much land use from the early 1600s, right at the beginning of European colonization, and moving up to the present. So in the upper left, you can see the distribution of forest cover, Great Plains, pasture land, that sort of habitat in the United States. In the eastern U.S., dominated by dense, thick, mature forest. And as the colonists grew, they cleared the forest for agriculture, making their way. And then by the early 1900s, in the state of Maryland, the only forest that was left was way out in that western reach of the mountains that I was talking about in the Appalachian Ridge and Valley and the Cumberland Plateau. That was replaced by pasture land and family agriculture. And as the forest was cleared, that gave room for grassland birds to spread easterly from the Midwest and colonize different areas of the eastern U.S. Barn owls probably historically were found in Maryland, limited, however, to the marshlands around the Chesapeake Bay and some of the natural grasslands that you might find in some of the like the barrens, serpentine barrens, and things of that nature. This is one of my favorite slides, as being a long-term resident of Washington, D.C., my family. This is the photo on the left here is a shot of Washington in the late 1800s, actually when my family lived there. And you can see there's virtually no tree in sight. And in the background, there's all wide open agriculture and pasture land. The Smithsonian Castle was built in 1885 and immediately was inhabited in the tower, the bell tower, by barn owls. They nested there until the mid-1950s. Pretty spectacular that barn owls were living and nesting in our nation's capital for nearly 70, 80 years. Pretty cool. So if we kind of zoom out and look at the barn owl distribution throughout the U.S., particularly in the eastern United States, you can see that they are listed as vulnerable or imperiled in the majority of the states in the eastern U.S. from the Midwest to the east. They're fairly stable in the western states, and probably Florida and California have the highest densities of barn owls in the U.S. But they're struggling in much of our country. If we look at kind of a history of conservation efforts in our area, National Audubon put barn owl on the blue list in the late 1980s. A colleague and good friend of mine started a program, research project in the late 1980s, and published a work that barn owls were marsh birds too. So I kind of really just brought to light that these guys will hunt and thrive in a marsh environment and not just agriculture or grassland. You can see Prince George's County, Calvert County, St. Mary's. We got started along the Patuxent River Valley with nest box projects in late 1980s and the early 90s. Maryland designated barn owl on its watch list. And then, as I mentioned before, in 2015, stated it as a species of greatest conservation need. We've been fortunate to have 3 breeding bird atlases conducted in the state of Maryland. Not too many other states are lucky to have that. And this is some fantastic data that we have with all of our bird species, but specifically with barn owls and American kestrels. This was the first breeding bird atlas, 1983 to 87, that I was part of. And then 20 years later, it was repeated. You can see the distribution of confirmed barn owl nesting in the state. This is about 1.3%, 1.5% of atlas blocks. And then the second breeding bird atlas, you can see a very significant decline. And you're starting to see now clusters of barn owl activity in the state in specific areas from 2002 to 2006. And then as we move forward to the most recent 2020 to 24, it's declining even more. So we've pretty much determined that barn owl populations have declined from the first breeding bird atlas to the latest by 79% in the state of Maryland. It's pretty dire. We need to really start doing something to help these birds in our state. So this is kind of a look at maybe why barn owls have declined so rapidly in the last 40 years. Significantly in the last 40 years. The map on the right are that breeding bird atlas data that was superimposed into these yellow blobs, so to speak, where the barn owls are found. The map on the left is human development, and you can see the majority of that human development occurs along the Interstate 95 corridor that runs from Richmond, Virginia, all the way up through Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and up into New York City. So these major metropolitan areas are taking away suitable habitat for these grassland species. Agricultural areas are disappearing for suburban and urban development, and you can see on the map on the right that there are no barn owls existing along that I-95 corridor. Since when I first started working with barn owls in the Patuxent River Valley, I was pretty much just banding chicks, and actually everybody who was working with them in the state was doing the same thing. We were just banding chicks and hoping for some results. Unfortunately, because our numbers were so low, and that band recoveries are so few and far between, we only, in that 30-year period, for the first 30 years of this work, we only had like a handful of recoveries. So when David Johnson encouraged me to start capturing adults in 2019, we increased our recapture rate by nearly 5,000%. That's quite remarkable. You can see for the first 60 years of band recoveries in Maryland from 1960 to 2019, there were only 63 recovered barn owls, and then from 20 to 25, we have recovered 27, and that's a 5,000% increase, which is pretty remarkable. Obviously, we're collecting data about the morphology, but when we have this kind of return rate, this kind of recovery rate, we start to learn things about the population demographics of these birds, and that, in my opinion, is extremely important. We've gotten some pretty cool longevity records over the years, 8, 9, and even 10-year-old birds, which is pretty remarkable. Literature states that the average lifespan of a barn owl is between 4.5 and 5 years old. But once they reach a certain age, it seems like they can live for quite a long time. So we had a 10-year-old male. We had a 9-year-old male who occupied a nest box for a number of years. And he fledged as a chick. He was banded as a chick and fledged from a nest box that was about 20 miles away. We had a female who I banded in a nest box that was kind of lured in by another male 10 miles further down the river. We can get a little bit of information about some of the dispersal and where these birds go. Do they stick around the area? Do they go far away? We had a 7-year-old female which nested 3 consecutive years in our nest boxes. She disappeared for 2 years, and then we caught her again for 2 years later in a different nest box, just maybe a quarter mile or half a mile from where she nested previously. Where'd she go for those 2 years? Who knows? But it's pretty interesting stuff. Literature says that the females in their early years tend to be rather fickle, and they may try out different partners year after year after year, and then once they reach a certain age, they tend to settle down with one fella who they tend to like or are most compatible with. So maybe we're seeing that. A lot of this data that we're getting has only come from the last 4 or 5 years of capture. So it's limited in its volume, but we're hoping to really pick that up and get a lot more information about it. Mate and site fidelity has been really fascinating to me. We have found only a 4% rate of owls keeping the same mate year after in consecutive years. Rare, very, very slow, very low. It could be part of this a phenomenon where the females are fickle and trying out the other males in the area. 19% of the nest boxes kept the same birds, not pair, but individual. And some of the research literature has shown that the males tend to be the ones who will stay by the nest site, and the females will then move around. And that kind of is what we're seeing a little bit. Males tend to stay in the same on the same box, and may have a different partner the following from year to year. So we're seeing a little bit of evidence of that as well. So it's another interesting fact is that we're getting a high rate of recruitment into our study area populations, as much as 55%. These are birds coming from other sources rather than our own nest boxes, either through banded birds or unbanded birds recruiting into the breeding population. It's quite fascinating. So age structure, we have found that the majority of the adults that are occupying our nest boxes are older birds after 3rd year, and then a spattering of other ages from there, and that's kind of just supports the idea that once an owl finds suitable and productive habitat, it's gonna stay there and defend that. And chase the young birds away. A more older dominant bird would have a better opportunity to defend its territory. So we had a situation where on three different locations, individual locations, where we were captured two nest boxes very close proximity to each other, maybe a quarter mile at the most. Where they were both occupied, and so we were trapping adult birds. We caught both females pretty readily, but we only caught one male at one location, and that kind of brought up the question: Are these males providing for 2 separate families when they're in close proximity? We never did catch another male at either of those 3 locations. Unfortunately, we weren't unsuccessful at catching a male at the sister box, so we couldn't prove it for sure. But that's quite that has been seen in other areas of the world, but it really hasn't been documented in the U.S. I don't believe so. It's quite possible. we can age these birds. Many of you are familiar with solid owl banding or other owl species, where under UV light, certain feathers will fluoresce due to the amount of porphyrin that they produce, that they have. Younger feathers will shine, will fluoresce a brighter color. So barn owls do undergo an incomplete molt, where they will only molt certain primary feathers in 1 year, and then different ones the second year, and so forth. So they do show a relatively strong pattern to where you can age them pretty successfully. So a second year bird, if you're catching birds after January 1st, a second year bird, hatch year, second year bird will not have replaced any of its flight feathers. So they will all be uniform in coloration. They will all fluoresce slightly, a little bit, depending on how much sunlight these birds have been out in. A third year bird will replace primary number 6. And that will be a bright pink feather under the UV light. And then pretty much after, third year, the pattern becomes a little bit more random, where it hasn't been identified yet to be too specific. So we are aging our birds as second year, third year, or after third year. So that gives us a fairly decent look at at the age structure of our population. How many are in their first breeding year as an SY, how many are in their second breeding year as a TY, and then how many are essentially older adults. This is a pretty fascinating story about one of our nest boxes on the lower eastern shore of Maryland. We caught both male and female one night, and they were both previously banded as chicks from the same location. Well, we got back and looked at the band numbers and the records. They happened to be banded as chicks from the same nest. They were brother and sister. So that's pretty interesting. That they were a mated pair and had young in the nest. Both were relatively young birds. I think that, well, obviously they were same age, but they were young birds at the time, SY. And the following year, we came back and trapped at the nest again. We caught the male, but the female he was mated with was a 10-year-old female from an adjacent box. So he kicked his sister out and hooked up with the older lady down the street, which was seemed like a pretty good decision, I think. So we've over the years we've found that there are certain variables associated with the trapping, timing, and so forth that affect trapping success. When we first started, we were trapping birds between when the chicks were between 4 weeks and 7 weeks old. We had a concern about disturbing the nest, about the potential of nest abandonment by capturing and handling the adult birds. So we waited until the chicks were a little bit older and that they were committed to feeding. We found that our trapping success actually started going up when we were trapping when the chicks were younger in age. And as a matter of fact, we're now finding that we're getting a much higher trapping success between when the chicks just hatch, and 4 months of age. So that's when we kind of target 4 weeks of age. I'm sorry, 4 weeks of age. That's when we target our trapping times now. They are really bringing lots of food to the nest, to the chicks during that time period. Once they get past 4, 5, 6 weeks old, the feeding frequency goes down, and we tend to not have as great success. So we have yet to have any nests abandoned because of us trapping or handling the birds. Oftentimes, trapping is done when when the chicks are young like that. It's still kind of cool and chilly out at night. So if we capture the female, we will stick her in the nest box, put the trap back on, and essentially lock her in there. And that will also help encourage the male to actually enter the trap. So that's another variable that increases our trapping success. That's a cool shot. We've started to that's a pretty cool shot of the female looking through the trap. We've started to use some nest cameras. This is a nest box that we have installed in an old unused silo that I mounted essentially a Wise security cam on the inside of the ceiling, and we've been able to really learn a lot of information about their behaviors and about their timing, phenology, and so forth. But this is a video clip of mom bringing a vole to the chicks. The chicks here are probably they're probably about 7-8 weeks of age, between 7 and 8 weeks of age. They're pretty much ready to start flying. Our nest box design is so that it's a top opening that flips over onto itself. And once we band the chicks at 6-7 weeks old, we flip that top open. So that gives these guys an area to branch out and sit on top of the box and so forth. So this is a video clip of mom bringing the vole to them. If you look down into the box, you can see three little white heart-shaped faces looking up at her. Practicing wing beats. And out she goes. So this video clip was probably early to mid-July, and then the chicks hung around and stayed in. They would go out and hunt at night and come back to the silo to sleep during the day with mom and dad. And sometime around the end of August, they dispersed. They left the silo, and mom and dad were left in the nest box. So they went off and tried to find a place of their own after about a month from when they were able to fly. This is a shot from that same nest box. We installed some cameras to look inside the box. So that same fall that we recorded the previous video, mom and dad disappeared. They left probably towards the end of August, early November. We had a particularly cold winter that winter with snow cover that lasted for a good 2 weeks in this area where this nest box was located in central Maryland. On March the 12th, I remember it distinctly because it was my daughter's birthday. Mom came back. She showed up in the silo just out of nowhere. Unfortunately, dad did not. And mom stayed for about 6 weeks. She would go out and fly at night, come back in. She would call and call and call. But unfortunately, dad never returned. And so after about 6 weeks, she left as well. So it was kind of sad, heartbreaking for us. But that gave us some great insight on the behaviors of these birds and what they were doing. Obviously they had to leave the area because of cold temperatures and an inability to find food under snow cover, but they did return. She did return to the same nest site that she used in previous years. So, it just does kind of prove a fact that the cold winter and winter conditions are very difficult for barn owls. The literature says that they don't have an ability to store lots of fat, and so because they hunt on the wing, they need to remain agile. So they have a difficulty surviving cold temperatures. So when it gets cold and snow cover, they have to move in order to find food. And whenever a bird moves like that, migrates or partially migrates, it's a stress. So if we look at this map, it's kind of our broken up into different colored coordinated blocks there that represent the different study areas that we have in the state of Maryland. I mentioned before this central Maryland and the Piedmont area with lots of agriculture, still pasture land and so forth. The purple is southern Maryland, and that line that you see there of boxes in a row, blocks in a row, is the Patuxent River Valley, where I first started my work. And then the red blocks are on the eastern shore of the bay in that Delmarva Peninsula that I was describing. So each one of them has some really unique characteristics and that separate them from each other. The Central Maryland, the blue blocks are primarily in, as I mentioned, agricultural areas, pasture lands. They feed almost entirely on meadow voles. The purple blocks, they hunt marshlands and agricultural lands, a mix of the two. So they're feeding on meadow voles, but they're also feeding heavily on marsh rice rat, which occurs in the wild rice marshes of the Patuxent River. And the eastern shore, the red population, is feeding again heavily on Microtus, the meadow vole. But interestingly, these meadow voles are living in the salt marsh, which is you normally wouldn't think about a meadow vole living in a salt marsh, but the type of marsh grass there, Spartina patens, salt meadow hay, is a low-growing marsh grass that tends to fall over and create these little corridors where the meadow voles run. And sure enough, that's what these owls are hunting. We've gone through, and picked through all of the nest box contents and analyzed, the prey makeup of these nest boxes. It's a fun process, but quite stinky. But as I mentioned before, the two populations that are feeding on meadow voles are as much as more than 90%. Whereas the ones hunting in the brackish marsh, the freshwater marsh, mix it up between half meadow voles and half marsh rice rat. Birds are making up about 15 to 20%, and then spattering of other creatures. This is a pretty cool slide of the bird skulls that were found in box contents. You can see the majority of them are icterids. They're blackbirds that live in the marshes. So again, Alexander Rouland's book mentions that oftentimes the adults will remove the head of the prey, consume it, and bring the rest of the body to the chicks. One of the advantages of us capturing the adults when they come to feed the chicks is that we get a look at what they're bringing back to the kids. So that's also shows us how we the different populations rely on different food sources, but it also shows a little bit about the health or the quality of the environment. We found that Central Maryland in the Piedmont area with the high agricultural areas, they're bringing intact prey back to the nest. Those they don't have to remove the head. And the ones on the lower eastern shore and the saltwater marshes are doing the same. whereas the adults that are along the Patuxent River are often almost entirely bringing headless prey back to the chicks. And so, the head of the mouse or the bird or the vole, is high protein and high fat. It gives you the most amount of energy for the bang for the buck, kind of like your 5-hour energy, without taking up so much space in your stomach to weigh you down, and you can get out there and continue to hunt. So we're going to come up with a new flavor for 5-hour energy, the Meadowvole flavor, and see if we can market that. One of the most common questions we get is, when we're starting to put nest boxes up, landowners are like, are these things going to eat my chickens? Are they going to eat my rabbits? Or are they going to affect my quail population, bobwhite quail population? Or are they going to eat my chihuahua? Obviously the answer is no. We've proven that they don't eat these types of prey. Barn owls are the most studied owl species in the world. However, 80 to 90% of the studies that are done with barn owls are diet based. So we've got a really good handle on what barn owls eat, and they do not eat chihuahuas for sure. So, another interesting characteristic of our 3 different study populations is nest site availability. I mentioned that I started working on the Patuxent River Valley, 40 years ago, and my approach then was to put as many nest boxes up as I possibly could in as many different places that could potentially support barn owls. At one point we had over 75 nest boxes just along the Patuxent River Valley, but at the most only 10 were ever used at one given year. So there was a lot of time wasted monitoring nest boxes that were never used. So we've kind of taken a new approach about how to determine where we put nest boxes. The population on the lower eastern shore that I mentioned before is one that is very much limited by nest site availability. These birds are nesting in very unconventional locations. We've had them nest in large equipment in the lower left-hand side. I'm removing an adult female who was incubating eggs in this excavator, and we moved her eggs and her groceries over to a nest box that we put in so that the folks could use the equipment. And they've been found nesting in the attics of houses that are occupied by humans, which is very uncommon. Barn owls tend to be very secretive, and they don't like human disturbance. But they must enjoy listening to the TV in the evening, TV broadcast in the evenings, I guess. But so we're have much greater success with our nest boxes on the on the eastern shore, where some of these study sites have 100% accurate occupancy. Yeah, so with the one shot there in the upper center was a barn owl nest on the balcony of a condominium in Crisfield, Maryland, which can you imagine walking out onto your balcony and coming across a nest of barn owl chicks, which is pretty remarkable. So these are some of the different criteria that have developed to try to determine where we put our nest boxes. Obviously, the presence of barn owls is the top priority. If there are owls present, we're going to put a box up. How do we determine whether or not there are owls present? There's a couple of different ways. Obviously, by people reporting that to us and saying we've got an owl in our silo or an owl in the barn. But we've also, Alex and I attended the World Owl Conference in 2023 there in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and listened to Carla talk about how she was using automated recording units to detect barn owls in the landscape. So we were thinking, wow, this is a terrific tool. Let's use that. And so we started doing that. We put ARU units out, and if we are targeting specific timing of the year when the owls are most actively courting or renewing pair bonds. So the end of February through the end of April, we run these automatic recording units, automated recording units, and if we have barn owl detections, that site gets moved up to a prime priority number one for receiving a nest box. We have some pretty good comprehensive data on historic nesting locations in Maryland from the first breeding bird atlas. And so, we're revisiting those locations, putting nest box in the vicinity of those successful nest sites. And, obviously putting nest boxes up in proximity of a historical site or proximity of an active box, is also a third level priority. The young birds need to go somewhere, and hopefully there's enough food that they would stick around and use those nest boxes. The Barn Owl Trust, Ian Taylor, Barn Owl Trust in the UK, stated in some of his literature that these historic locations were some of the first that were recolonized by barn owls. So that's kind of why we were targeting these historic nesting sites. And then lastly, suitable habitat. Suitable habitat, we're finding, that agricultural practices have changed over the last, 20, 30 years. The use of genetically modified plants is allowing farmers to spray, herbicides and pesticides on these fields to essentially eliminate all life in that field except the target plant, corn or soybeans. So these are pretty much sterile environments for everything, including insects and all the way up. So we're avoiding these areas of row crop. We're trying to target specific types of agriculture that don't use herbicide, pesticide, or rodenticide. Places like pasture lands, we're finding, are very productive nesting habitat for these birds. So let's talk a little bit about our barn owl boxes themselves and how we have kind of changed over time. There's if you go on the internet and you look at the nest box designs, you'll find everything under the sun. And so we first started out with a nest box design, and I'm not sure where the origin was. Back in the late 1980s, one of our colleagues came up with a nest box that was about 2 feet square. Looked very much like a bluebird house or a kestrel box, but it was 24 inches square. That seemed to work pretty well for a number of years, but I encountered several different times when I was banding chicks and putting them back into the box. If I had a chick in the box and I was returning another one in that I was banding, that sometimes the chick that was in the box would reach out and grab the baby that I was putting back in on a couple of occasions, and that was very disconcerting to me, that they were footing each other. So I thought, well, you know what, let's just make a bigger box. Let's make something that's bigger so that they that they can escape, they can feel safe further away from whatever is intruding into the box. And so since I started using that bigger box, I have not encountered that scenario since. The box on the left in this photograph here is I think it's a design that was widely accepted, and it's only about 11.5 inches wide. It's a 1x12 top and bottom, and it's 24 inches long, but I think it's called the Simmons box. But you can see how crowded it gets in there, with 2 adults, and then if you can imagine, a whole brood of young in there with them, compared to our bigger box on the right that seems quite spacious actually. So yep. So this Simmons box here in this photo was started working with one of our national wildlife refuges along Chesapeake Bay, and they had put some of these smaller boxes up on poles in and around near the marshes, and they were being used by the barn owls. But 2 years in a row, when I came to band the chicks at 5 weeks, found the boxes empty. And no evidence of predation. They had predator controlled devices on the boxes, and it was very, very strange. Well, one time we found the whole clutch of a whole brood of owl chicks on the ground outside of the box, running around through the marsh. Much way too young to fly. But I think my suspicion was that they got very crowded in the box, and they just had to get out of there. Seven chicks in a small space like that in the middle of the summer when it's 95 degrees out, it's probably an intolerable environment. So they just had to get out. I replaced all of these boxes with our larger box design, which is about 30 inches wide by 18 to 20 inches deep, and then the 2 feet tall. And since then, the chicks have remained in the nest box until they were ready to fledge. So no premature fledging or no premature branching, as it's often called with owls. So. We have put these boxes in a number of different scenarios. I talk a lot about the marshes of the lower eastern shore and along the Patuxent River Valley. The upper left-hand corner there is one of our marsh boxes. We sink those 4x4s down into the muck of the marsh, and they go deep, deep down in there, leaving the box at about 4 or 5 feet in height to the entrance hole of the box. So to keep raccoons out of it, we put a skirt around it of sheet metal, and they are extremely successful even at that height. We've put some boxes in 3-sided equipment sheds, like the central one in the top row there, and had good success with them. We've mounted boxes on the outsides of barns and other buildings, and they've worked well. The lower left-hand corner is a shot of me hoisting up an owl box inside of a silo into the top of a silo, where we would strap it around those rungs of the silo with ratchet straps. Silos are just incredibly attractive to barn owls. We've put boxes in silos where there hasn't been a lick of evidence that a barn owl has ever been in there. No pellets, no bones, no mutes, no droppings, any of that sort of thing. And then install the box, and then sure enough, bang, right away they're nesting in it. So these are features in the landscape that I think barn owls are routinely investigating as they fly around, and they're good roost sites. They feel comfortable to the owls. They're up nice and high, 20, 30 feet in the air. They're sheltered, and so they probably feel quite safe inside of a silo. And so we've had a great deal of success. We've worked with some of our local power companies to get donations of used power poles from the center lower photo there. That's a box mounted on a power pole. They drop the power poles off, and we stick them in the ground with the box on top. And then we've used pressure treated 4x4, 4x6, 6x6 to achieve the same situation. So those are some of the different mounting scenarios that we've used.
All right. So in this right-hand photo here, you can see there's a barn owl peeking out of the box there. And, sometimes it's not so easy to know whether or not one of these boxes is occupied. This is actually a favorite photo of Andy and I's, because it's kind of a little rare sight in Maryland to see a barn owl giving you that much attention. So to monitor these boxes, we rely heavily on volunteers. And you can see a volunteer here with an extension pole, and there's a camera on the top, and we use these body cameras that connect to your phone and you can see what's going on inside. And this kind of monitoring, it's critical because it allows us to not only, collect data on adult occupancy, but clutch size and chick numbers, overall nesting success, etc. But before I get too deep into this monitoring, there's another important piece of this work, which is cleaning out the boxes. And we clean out the boxes on a rotating schedule every few years so that the pellet buildup and the nesting material, it doesn't build up too much. But really, me talking about cleaning out nest boxes is an excuse for me to go off on another little tangent here. And that leads me to this story when I was cleaning out a nest box about 2 years ago down in the Patuxent River Valley. Andy mentioned that population. And this nest box actually wasn't used, but we weren't sure. And this was in December. We were cleaning them out in the winter. And I open this box and I look in the corner and I see this little small bird in the corner in December. And, I poked it gently and I immediately pretty much knew that it was dead. And I told the guy that I was working for at the time, my boss, Greg, and I said, Greg, there's a bird in here. And he said, well, what do you mean? Like a barn owl? And I said, no, like a little passerine. He said, well, don't touch it. I want to come up and see it before you move it. So he climbs up the ladder and I'm down there and I'm holding it and I'm looking up at him and it's December and he picks it up and he goes, oh, it's a great crested flycatcher. And I said, oh, cool. It must have been a while ago. And he goes, no, it's pretty fresh actually. And he throws it down to me and I catch it and I'm looking at this thing in my hands and pretty much immediately my heart jumped a beat because this thing was an ash-throated flycatcher. And you got to know a little bit about where we are in Maryland. But this is a rare bird for us. There's somewhat of a vagrancy pattern established in the east, but it's quite out of range. And these Myarchus flycatchers, they love cavities. So the point of monitoring here, of course, isn't to try to find ash-throated flycatchers in boxes. And good luck to anyone, including myself, trying to replicate that. But we do this work so volunteers, like I once was when I got involved, can help us collect this meaningful occupancy and nesting success data, like I was getting at. So here's a little taste of that. And on the left, you can see that in 2025, about 30% of the barn owl nest boxes in our network were occupied. And like Andy mentioned, that kind of low occupancy rate is largely due to the shotgun approach that was taken along the Patuxent River. So a lot of the boxes are in suboptimal habitat nowadays. But, when we look over here at the right, out of those occupied boxes, about 2/3 were successful. So what this reinforces is that when barn owls use these nest boxes in suitable habitat, or when we provide these boxes for them in suitable habitat, the barn owls will and do use them and nest successfully. So these nest boxes by far remain one of the most effective tools that we can use to support this species. And barn owls aren't the only species that we support with nest boxes. The title of this talk got at that a little bit. And I'll show you this other nest box we have. And if you think a barn owl is nesting in this box, well, absolutely not. We should have established that by now. It's not a barn owl, but it's these cute little guys right here, the American kestrel. So the American kestrel is North America's smallest falcon, and it's the smallest bird of prey on the continent. Now, these guys are roughly the size of a mourning dove. They're small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. But beyond this charisma, beyond this, small size, that's not what's important here. What's important here is looking at things like their conservation status. And if you look at American kestrels at a glance, they appear apparently secure overall as a bird breeding species, or fairly so. So you might ask, reasonably, why would a species like this be one of our focal species? Well, we'll go back to the Maryland Breeding Bird Atlas data to answer this. Andy got a little bit into this, but to remind you, this is a citizen science effort to document breeding behavior and evidence of breeding in species across the state. So from 1983 to 1987, the first one occurred, and I'll flip between these maps. You can see from the first to the second, obviously a lot of that green is disappearing. And from the second to the third, you can see even more of that green. So we'll do it one more time really quickly. 1, 2, 3. And we have a bar graph just like we did for barn owls. American kestrels, they've declined by about 53%, breeding American kestrels in Maryland over the last 40 years. Absolutely alarming. And just like barn owls, one of the most direct ways that we can address these declines is by restoring breeding sites and already suitable habitat. Right, both kestrels and barn owls, they rely on these open landscapes, these pastures, hay fields, agricultural fields with edges, especially where these pesticides and rodenticides are, used at a minimum, if not at all. And in these systems, natural nesting cavities, they're often limited or absent. So installing these nest boxes, it replaces a missing breeding site and allows these birds to nest where the habitat is otherwise suitable. So we'll go back to some more pie charts here, and we'll look at our 2025 nest box data. And about a quarter of our boxes were occupied. Kind of unlike the barn owl data, right? It wasn't a shotgun approach here. It was much more targeted, but our nest box program for kestrels is very new. So that's where a lot of that unoccupied portion is coming from. And this reinforces the same point that we saw with barn owls. So when we place nest boxes in suitable habitat, the kestrels will use them and they will nest successfully. And in the vast majority of cases where we were putting these nest boxes, for barn owls and kestrels, neither species was present on the property before the box was installed, especially for kestrels. Now, we really are addressing these declines, and the approach we're taking is addressing them one nest box at a time, you could say. But we're not doing it alone. With the help of volunteers, the help of landowners forming these partnerships, but especially the landowners supporting healthy land use practices and advocating for them. And most of the time, we're not a hard sell, right? We're providing free nest boxes, providing free labor for installation and monitoring, and then the birds do the rest. Barn owls and kestrels, they're preying on species that landowners would rather not have around. These animals that damage crops, contaminate feed, cause a lot of other problems. And, we like to think that barn owls, kestrels, these farmland raptors can really be a landowner's best friend. Maybe not in this sense. We don't want barn owls perching on the landowner's hand there. But you get the idea. They're providing this natural pest control. They reduce the need for pesticides and rodenticides. And these are chemicals that don't just affect the target species, but they move through the food web and landscapes and ultimately are affecting us as well. So through this work with landowners and volunteers, our focus really is on partnerships and getting people involved. So listen to Smokey the Bear there. And I know I'm speaking to an international audience, but if you're local or if you're interested in replicating this kind of work in your community, I'd really encourage you to do so. There's some wonderful resources we have on our website. And at the end of our talks, I really love to share this quote. Because I came to this work through birding, as Andy did as well. That's kind of what the spark was for us. And this quote has always really stuck with me. And that is that birding, after all, is just a game. Going beyond that is what is important. And I hope you all feel that and do go beyond that and do feel that it's important. Thank you for listening to Andy and I ramble on about barn owls, a little bit about kestrels. There's some contact information. And especially thank you to our partners. We couldn't make this work happen without you.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you very much. I took a few pages of notes on that myself. If you want to stop screen sharing, then everybody can see us all better. And then Joe and I will start throwing questions your way.
All right. Have there been any DNA studies done to determine if a single male may be servicing multiple females?
Not to my knowledge, certainly not here in the United States, and I haven't read any literature that says that. I mean, that's, I wouldn't say it's common, but it's has happened relatively frequently in areas of very high density, like in Israel and in Europe and other areas in Europe, where one male has provided for multiple families, and that evidence was through banding and band numbers, so, and recapture.
Here's a fun one. So is the short lifespan due to biological reasons, or is it predation accounting for the short lifespan, or why the short lifespan?
Well, that's a great question, because in certain areas, other countries, and even in certain areas in the U.S., it's estimated that mortality rates within the first year of life are upwards between 75 and 85%. So as young birds, they really get hammered. And for all of those reasons, they fall prey to other owls. They in, like, for example, in the West, vehicle strikes are a significant cause of mortality, where these large open areas, open farmlands, and long straight roads, and the birds are hunting close to the roadside and just get whacked by vehicles. Rodenticide use is something that we need to really get a handle on, and to see what kind of impacts they're having here in the United States, and even more closer to home, regionally. So there's a lot of different variables that cause high mortality for these birds.
And I'm just going to throw on an addendum, because I just saw this morning, I think somewhere on Facebook, that there was a captive barn owl that a facility had that was 21 years old.
Yeah, so we throw out these, what do you say, Andy, 4 to 5 years old, is kind of that average,
right? Exactly.
Yeah, and we throw out that number, but whenever this question's brought up, I really like to make people think about the fact, if we could, add up, get all the barn owl mortality, including the chicks that we're talking about, where that's the most dangerous period of their life, the average would probably be, right around fledging age or something like that, because that is the most dangerous period of their life. And that goes for all birds, and really, I can't speak to other animals, but probably a lot of other animals as well.
We have a couple of questions about specific photos in your presentation. Somebody wants to see the picture of the alien barn owls again.
That actually came from our friend Herrera Chavez in Venezuela. That was one of her nest boxes that she was monitoring. She's got a very successful program for barn owls there in Venezuela, and it was just striking. Yeah.
All right. You ask and you shall receive. Here we go.
Yeah. They're such odd-looking birds.
Yeah, seriously. All right. The other photo requests before I pull this down?
The other one says, and I'm not sure which picture they're referring to, but it says, in one of the first photos of the nestling barn owls, it appears that there was a metal spring hanging from the wing pit of the largest nestling. So I'm not sure which photo they were referring to.
I'm not either, and I've never noticed that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, maybe it was this one, but
I wonder if they were seeing the feather buds poking out.
Maybe like here, it looks maybe spring-like.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yes, the eruption of primary flight feathers. Sorry.
This person lives in Wisconsin. They've been birding for many years, and they're wondering what time of year is the best chance to see a barn owl in the wild, like driving around and looking at barns.
Well, it sounds like they might be planning on trespassing.
Well, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
Probably, we have found through eBird reports that there's certain times a year where there are more encounters with barn owls than others, and that tends to happen right after chick dispersal. Okay, so late summer, early fall, where these guys are leaving their natal habitats and looking for new environments. You've got a pulse in the population numbers with all these chicks that are being produced. So that's probably your most likely time to encounter one.
And I'd like to throw in also, so there was a nest just over in La Crosse, Wisconsin that I monitored, and it was literally in people's backyards in the city of La Crosse in a giant half-dead silver maple tree. And I can talk about it because the tree's not there anymore. You can't go see it. And so the neighbors all knew about it. They all knew not to tell anybody or they were never going to have privacy again. So they would keep me apprised of what was going on. I had an audio recorder there, and I came periodically with a pole cam and would just peep up into the into the cavities and see if they were nesting. And the neighbors contacted me. It was a fall nest when it was found, so they were nesting twice a year. So it was a fall one. So the next spring, the neighbor said, "We think they've left. There's no poop. There's no pellets. There's no feathers. We hear nothing." And she was sitting on eggs. And the people knew to be looking for her, and there was no sign. They
for
literally
sure
thought
are
she
the
had
hardest
left.
to find. Yes.
Yeah.
So are you getting them nesting twice a year also, spring and fall?
Just we've had very few times we've had them nest spring and fall. The majority are spring only. Where they do occur, where they do nest twice, is on that eastern shore portion of the state where there's the salt marshes. There's an island that has been created by the dredge spoils from the inner harbor of Baltimore. And they're slowing down, trying to rebuild this island specifically for wildlife habitat. And there are no mammalian predators on this island, and the abundance of meadow voles there is staggering. And so they are reproducing. The barn owls are reproducing, almost continuously throughout the year there on that island. So.
And I'll just throw out, like, acoustically, if you're listening for barn owls, so I do year-round acoustic monitoring. They're most vocal in the spring. So if you're in Wisconsin, that's going to be March, April, May is when they're most vocal. And then again in September, October. Probably slightly different elsewhere in the country, but the primary just vocalizing unsolicited just on their own is in the spring.
And
Yeah.
we have found that they do respond to playback, but they don't always call. They'll just kind of show up. They'll fly over top of you, and woof, there goes a big white shadow right above you. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to this, I mean, it really depends geographically where you are in Maryland. I mean, it really is a matter. I was kidding, but it is a matter of trespassing a lot of the time because they love these private properties, and they're just hanging out in these private silos and barns all day. And actually, in the last like 4 years that I've been paying attention to barn owls, I've only seen one naturally, and that was last winter. Andy and I were out trapping banding short-eared owls, which you can hear us talk about next week. But we, when they plow snow and the snow gets all the gravel and dirt around it, and just there's like these dirty chunks of snow. And I was looking, and I thought that that's what I was seeing, kind of sitting, but it was in the middle of a field, which is a weird place for a dirty chunk of plowed snow. And then I put my binoculars up, and it's a barred owl or a barn owl sitting there, cold as can be. So obviously, there's a lot of food stress going on. There was snow cover on the ground for quite some time. But you hear about going to places like Florida and elsewhere, and they're just sitting on fence posts, and that's not the case here at all, ever. And then Carla, that's as far as vocalizations, that's also what we encounter here. And with a lot of this, these nocturnal flight call stations, we're seeing a lot of barn owls being picked up in that time frame as well. So
I'm gonna combine several questions because they all have to do with volunteers. How many volunteers do you have for your program? How does someone who wants to volunteer get in contact with you, and how do you reach out to the farming community to find willing landholders?
Yeah. Well, we're currently monitoring 144 boxes in the state, throughout the state, barn owl boxes. Okay, that doesn't count kestrels. And we've kind of set up this organizational structure where we have regional box managers. So we'll have a box manager for the lower eastern shore. We'll have another one for, the Patuxent River Valley, and then we'll have another one for, whatever, Frederick County or something of that nature. And they will, their job is to coordinate the monitoring of those boxes within that region that they have. Some, I don't know, Alex, you could probably know off the top of your head the total number of volunteers, but each of those regions probably have, close to a dozen volunteers apiece that are going out and monitoring those boxes. Yeah, we recruit them by, giving presentations and talks, to various bird clubs and other related organizations in the community, and that's how they contact us via email, which we shared. Joe, you shared, and we go through a very extensive training with them on how to monitor and so forth. Landowners. Landowners are not always the easiest to deal with. There's a lot of landowners who don't, that want to kind of stay to themselves and don't want folks coming on their property. And that has been a challenge for us. But we try multiple avenues for developing landowner relations. And mailings and cold calls are definitely not successful. But mailings and emails and even sometimes we have success just knocking on doors too. And so, Alex, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, you really got at the core of it there. It's all about just personal relationships. So having those relationships with the volunteers and kind of starting from the ground up there and getting those volunteers to connect us with maybe their neighbor who might own some land or somebody that they know. I mean, that's the best way to approach it. It's the internet makes it fairly easy nowadays to find anybody's phone number. So you could just give them a call, but believe it or not, that creeps people out sometimes. So it's much better to be able to, get somebody to introduce you.
And I'm going to tack on an extra question. Sorry, Carla, because it does kind of work in with what you were asking about or talking about. If someone does want to contact you about this, is there a specific email address that you can give out, or is it just through the contact form on the website?
That's a great question. Everybody can see this webinar chat on Zoom. Is that correct?
If it says to everyone, then
got it. Well, yeah, let me drop the email in there. And there should be contact information on the website as well. So if you go to marylandbirds.org, you should be able to find it.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions about nest box design. Does your box have a partition or a vestibule at the front door? What species of wood do you build the boxes out of, and how long do they last?
Yeah, awesome. All very good questions. I have not built any with a partition. Okay. I've just really not had a whole lot of depredation from great horned owls. They just great horned owls are not super abundant where we are, and I think in my 40 years, I've only known of one that was, and that I'm pretty certain was great horned owl predation. So I use, you can see that I use the little porch on some of the nest boxes that we put in the interior of silos, or even on the interior of barns. Sometimes we'll use the little porch on it. I haven't encountered any problems with that at all. But they're made out of 1/2 inch CDX plywood, which is just your basic plywood that you get from the hardware store. And if they're painted, they last quite a long time. We do try to treat the roofs for if they're out in the weather. What we found is best for them is putting some type of aluminum flashing or something on the roof, gluing it down and stapling it. And I had a nest box. It's still there. The next nest box is still on the side of a barn, made out of plywood with aluminum flashing, that's been in place for 19 years. And it's still in very good shape. It's not, yeah. So, if it's in a good area, I'm sure it's probably not getting, a whole lot of direct rain, but the roof is protected, and it's lasted quite a long time.
And I'm going to tack on my own question at the end of that. What sort of hole diameter do you like to use?
So we use 5 3/4 or 6 inch, but our interior boxes that we use for the silos is not a round entrance hole. It's just kind of like a rectangular thing, and that's just a design feature for ease of construction. It has nothing to do with really the birds themselves. But yeah, minimum 5 3/4.
So I'm just going to throw out there, just because we had this with ourselves. Somebody had built some barn owl boxes for us to put up, and they were putting some up. And it was the Simmons box design, which has this teeny weeny little oval hole that's like 4 1/4 by 3 3/4 or something, insanely small. So before we put it up, I thought, well, let's put it in with our captive barn owl. And she was like, oh, nest box, go for the hole. And she's just trying to shove herself in the hole.
Oh, no.
And she physically could not get in the hole.
Oh my gosh.
Now, also you said that barn owls couldn't retain fat. Our captive one would probably
disagree with that.
yeah. So this year she's on par and fine. Last year her radiographs had butt cheeks on them because
Yeah,
so much
good
fat.
deal.
So it is physiologically possible.
Possible, right? Okay. We'll have to ask Alexander about that.
What's the average brood size in your area?
Well, we've got these three different geographical areas in the state, and they vary. I forgot to mention about the adult birds returning. Oh well. But anyhow, the lower eastern shore tends to be much more productive, and we'll have nest brood sizes of 6, 7 young, regularly in that area. The Patuxent River Valley is much smaller. Probably, we'll start out with 5 or 6 eggs, and then by the time they're fledging, we're having 1, 2, or 3 chicks make it to fledge. Central Maryland is somewhere in between that. It's relative to the richness of the food source of where these birds are hunting. So certain boxes are in really good habitats and will produce 7 young. We've had one clutch, one nest actually laid 10 eggs. One female laid 10 eggs, hatched 9 of them, and fledged 7. But the two that didn't make it were because they ended up in the bottom of the silo, unfortunately, and that's why they didn't make it. They would have survived had we had a bigger box in there for them. So yeah.
Do you want to talk about the difference in when barn owls breed depending on latitude? Like, are they breeding earlier in the year further south, later further north, or how many broods per year?
I don't have any actual data on that, but it would be all based, pretty much on speculation. In that, they're gonna reproduce in response to food availability. Okay, so if they're getting a lot of food, they're just going to continue to reproduce. That's something that's kind of unique to barn owls, is that they'll breed any time of year. They don't have a specific nesting season. So if they're getting lots of food, they'll continue to breed throughout the calendar year. So it's not necessarily in response to the time of year, only in the fact that it would relate to vole population. So they're probably going to be laying eggs when young voles are similarly leaving the nest, are weaned and out there, feeding on their own in the environment. So it's more about in response to food availability than it is timing, calendar timing.
This person wants to know why the box in the marsh was painted black and not a paler color to reflect summer sunlight.
Yep, that's. Thank you for bringing that up. We do not recommend painting boxes dark in color because, in Maryland, Maryland summers, especially in the marsh, are quite brutal, with high heat and high humidity. We actually went back and repainted that box a light color, tan color. So yeah, we need to replace that photo. So yeah, great question. Thank you.
Have you looked at barn owl mortalities at the region's airports, like Reagan International? Well, anyway, they list a bunch of them. Have you looked at any of the airport mortality?
No, we have not. Alex, is there anything you want to add to that?
I mean, barn owl specifically,
Yeah.
specific airport mortality, it's not something that we really hear about. I'll get into airport mortality a little bit in our short-eared owl talk next week, and we definitely hear about it with them. But yeah, all the USDA APHIS people that we've talked to just never really bring it up. I mean, knowing that we deal with barn owls as well, I guess we haven't really specifically really dug for that sort of information.
No, we haven't.
Yeah.
I do know that they nest readily at one of our local airports, the Dulles International Airport in Virginia, which is part of the Washington, D.C. suburbs. And I know that they nest there every year, and I have banded chicks from there, but that's nothing in terms of mortality rates. That's a good question.
How often can you trap a barn owl before it becomes wary?
Well, I don't have an answer to that question because I've never encountered one become wary. As a rule of thumb, we don't try to trap on consecutive nights. Okay, if we don't get male and female in that first night, we usually wait about a week to try to trap again and get the other partner. So we haven't really done a whole lot of testing that theory of how frequently. I've caught females, multiple times, 3, 4, 5 times, the same female, the same nest, in a nesting season. okay, over a month's period, because we had difficulty catching the male. We just kept catching the female over and over and over again, and just didn't really seem to discourage her from going into the trap. We've not had any. I mentioned earlier, we've not had any abandonment of nest sites because of trapping. So yeah, I don't know what the threshold is actually. I don't want to test it.
Here's a totally different question. What headlamp do you recommend for owl work? Like
Oh,
owl
good grief.
banding?
Not the Walmart ones. They're not bright enough, and that's
Yeah.
what I had for maybe like the past 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking like, cheapest Walmart one you can possibly get, but I think that's a given. I don't know. Amazon has some pretty good ones.
I like something in the 12 to 1500 lumen range. You can get brighter ones, but it's certainly not. I don't find it necessary. In fact, I've got one that's like 1800 lumens, and I sometimes feel like it's too bright. So I oftentimes will use it only for specific things. So
Do you use colored lights or just the regular white light?
we do use red light and white light depending on what we're doing.
And
If we're
we didn't really have pictures of this because I think a lot of the pictures where we were using headlights, actually there were pictures when we were working the bird up and measuring it, but a lot of the pictures were right when we got it out of the trap or something like that. But we do have these hoods for the bird. It's just a sock, the toe of a sock cut off and cut a little slit to put the beak through, and because you don't want to flash them in the eyes.
Yeah.
Little owl ski mask.
Yes.
We have a couple people asking where they can buy pre-made nest boxes. Someone says that their daughter bought one that had built-in solar-powered cameras. Just wondering if you know where people can get them.
No, unfortunately, I don't. I checked with your local wild bird stores would be something that I would recommend. There is a company that sells barn owl boxes made of plastic or PVC, and I think I'm almost certain that Dr. Matthew Johnson from Cal Poly did some tests with that box and found that barn owls actually prefer wooden boxes over the plastic ones.
I imagine the plastic ones would get pretty hot.
Or they're slick, I think, and they may not like the way
and
on the ice.
The size we recommend too, I don't think that you can really find that. A lot of the like pre-manufactured ones are quite small. So
and I think some other researchers, and Carla, you alluded to this the other day, found that maybe nest mortality is lower with a larger size nest box.
Yeah, so Scott Rashid from Colorado, who's done a lot of barn owl work out there, was one of our Hall of Fame award winners last year, and he upsized the boxes he was using and all of a sudden didn't have nestling mortality anymore when he was using bigger boxes. So he's all about bigger boxes also. Okay, another question. Is there any evidence that perhaps barn owl and wintering migratory short-eared owls are found in the same territories?
Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
I was trying to pull up this thing here. What can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. My computer was.
Is there any evidence that perhaps barn owls and winter migratory short-eared owls are found in the same territories?
Yeah, sure. Is there a particular story you're thinking about, Andy?
Well, just that over the last 3 years, we've started this work with short-eared owls, and for our first attempt for our first season, we didn't capture anything. But the consecutive 2 years, our capture rate has been pretty good, I believe, and we have captured not just short-eared owls, but also barn owls flying out over the marsh and hunting over the marsh 3 times. We've caught 3 barn owls in the winter using our short-eared owl lure. So yeah.
Okay.
They're as strong.
See where you were going.
Using the same territories and habitats.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's more fun to think about the fact that our short-eared owl lure. We'll get more into this, but it's a series of hoots, the male hoots, and then followed by some vole squeaks. And it's more fun for me to think about the fact that a barn owl might be coming in to bully the short-eared owl it thinks is sitting there, but I bet it's coming into the vole squeaks, and that's why we're capturing it. And we actually caught barn owl last winter. It was December 30th, I think. So it was still a hatchier bird, but it was banded in New Jersey, Salem County, New Jersey. So I don't know, for people who don't know, how many miles do you think that is north of us?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
I don't.
It's quite a fair distance though. So this dispersal was
across Delaware Bay. Yeah.
Do you have any coordination with neighboring states like West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and then specifically someone wants to know about Minnesota, why there weren't any barn owls shown on the map?
We not per se. We certainly work or share ideas and data and information with our surrounding states. Pennsylvania's got a pretty good Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources, DER. They've got a strong barn owl program. We've had correspondence and discussions with New Jersey, the folks in New Jersey who are doing work. Bruce Colvin has worked on barn owls in New Jersey for 45 years. And, so we often talk with him and Jordan Brown and the folks in Delaware. So yeah, we do, we don't really actually coordinate efforts, but we're just in contact with each other and share information.
Yeah.
This is a fun question because it's one that we get regularly, and there's always been speculation. So are barn owls in northern parts of their range migratory? So the question is, are they leaving your area in winter, or are they staying there all winter?
Well, thank you for that question, because that was one thing that I forgot to mention in our presentation. Because they're so impacted by winter conditions, temperature and snow cover, they have a very difficult time surviving winters in the north. And it's pretty fascinating what we've learned about these these different populations in Maryland. Specifically with last year and the trapping, and then the subsequent last winter and the subsequent trapping of the adults this past spring. We have a number of nest boxes that have been essentially used for a decade or more. Okay. And we've only been starting to trap those adult birds over the last 3 or 4 years. And, we have found, that the males will come back and use the same box. Females will sometimes change, but sometimes will stay. But, we've captured in consecutive years the same individuals at the same box. Some of these that are in real good, high quality environments. Well, last year, as I showed from that video, that pair disappeared and left. And then this year we trapped and we had 0 returns from the previous year in that particular population. So all of these birds in Central Maryland departed. They left from this area, and they were all brand new birds that came back and used our boxes the following spring. And it had to be in response to 2 weeks of snow cover on the ground and an inability to be able to find food. when they had nested in there, 2 or 3 consecutive years prior, they vacated. So I don't think they're migratory per se, but I think they leave the area in response to food availability or lack thereof. That population that I described on the lower eastern shore, in the marshes of the lower eastern shore on the other side of the Chesapeake Bay, didn't have the same kind of winter conditions that we had in central Maryland, and their breeding was routine, just like it was every year prior, with repeat individuals using the same boxes and staying in the same population. So they did not experience that exodus of birds during the winter that we did in central Maryland. So it's probably relative to where they are and where they're nesting and what the conditions are like during the winter. I would suspect.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw
Oh.
some anecdotal stuff in from around here. So I've seen, I mean, we do have barn owls around here in the winter in Minnesota and Wisconsin, where we have pretty wicked winters.
Yeah.
And I personally have seen a wild barn owl roosting in conifers with long-eared owls, and it must have been only slightly above zero with heavy winds. It was just wicked, like in February. So it had made it through the winter. I've got recordings of them in February and early March. I don't remember if I have January. So somehow here, they're making through wicked winters. There was one up in northeastern Minnesota in January. That one didn't make it.
At Saxon, yeah.
Yeah, at Saxon Bog. And then there was one in northwestern Minnesota that was found dead. I think it was in March, which would indicate it was probably there overwintering.
And I know the bird at Saxon was seen repeatedly flying during the day, and that that is probably a good indication that bird is starving, that he's starving to death, because if they're finding food, they're not going to be out during the day. They fall prey to diurnal raptors very, very quickly, and so he was on his way out probably.
Yeah, and there is a bit of there are a few papers I was trying to find, but my Zotero is not loading. That suggest banding data suggests there's somewhat of maybe migration that happens, but what I don't think you talked about is the fact that a lot of these traditional techniques to kind of gain insight into migratory behaviors, you can't use them with barn owls. So like attaching transmitters to barn owls wouldn't be worthwhile because the battery life would be very short. So you're attaching a device to a barn owl that would die and would give you very limited information. A lot of these, long-lasting transmitters are solar powered. And well, if you just think about it for a second, barn owls, they're like little vampires. They hate the sun. So you're not going to be able to charge that solar device. So there's new technologies coming out using Bluetooth and things like that Andy and I, just dream of using very soon to try to answer some of these questions. And just interestingly, the way that I like to, this is all speculative, but the way that I like to think about it in Maryland is that lower eastern shore population. So, on the other side of the bay, Chesapeake Bay, in the salt marshes, they're likely resident, probably not so migratory. I'm not sure about the Patuxent River or Central Maryland population, maybe a mix, and very dependent on weather conditions and food availability and whatnot, like Andy was saying. But I would think that the very Western Maryland population, maybe it's a little bit more like the populations where you live, Carla. But really high elevation there, it gets super cold. So I would bet if there's any birds that are, exhibiting these behaviors that we might more traditionally categorize as migratory, it's those birds.
I'm going to throw one that just came over just because it tacks on to what you were talking about. Has anybody tried modus tags with barn owls?
So Not that I know of, but the reason that I don't think modus tags would work very well is because, I mean, there is an expansive network in the East, and I did this work with Soras. But you're only getting, so the modus towers, they're detecting tags, give or take a number of variables, but within a 10-kilometer radius. And so you would think that barn owls probably wouldn't exhibit these large scale movements. And I'll put soars into that category as well. I mean, they're going from, just like southern Canada about down into Florida. So, they're spanning the whole United States, but barn owls, I wouldn't expect them to do that. And I don't think it's very worthwhile to attach a modus tag to them. I mean, saw-whets, there's a lot being done with saw-whets and modus tags as well. But I would think that barn owls are short distance and opportunistic migrants, where modus tags might really not fit in too well.
Matthew Johnson at Cal Poly has done some telemetry work with focusing on foraging areas in and around the vineyards, and that's been quite successful. But I don't, that's a different animal in California. So.
Joe, do you want to grab that last one you have tagged, and then we'll call it good, even though we haven't gotten through everything? Everybody is very excited to ask questions. This is great.
Do you have a program set up to have barn owls hunt rats and mice to cut down on those populations without using poisons?
I think when we're talking to landowners and we're developing those relationships and trying to encourage them to have nest boxes, we certainly use that as a benefit for them. We don't specifically have something formal saying that use these and they'll reduce your use of rodenticide. I think Carla actually would like to step in with that story about the tons of rodenticide that was replaced by barn owls. Would be great, and we certainly will use that in our landowner negotiations moving forward. But
yeah, so Andy was talking about when we were doing a test session, I was telling him that Rick Raid down in Florida, I'm not sure if he's still doing it, but was working with sugarcane farmers to put in barn owl nest boxes to use barn owls for rodent control instead of the poison. And there was some insane, I mean, they put up a ton of boxes, immediately occupied huge amount of barn owl use of the boxes and huge amount of rodent control. And I don't know that I remember the exact number, but it was mind-boggling. There was one farmer that had, more than 1,000 acres, and he had been spreading something like 2 tons of we're talking tons of rodenticide per year that he had been using. And once they got up enough barn owl boxes, it was doing as good as, if not better than, the rodenticides he was spreading. So in certain areas, it can really be phenomenal as natural rodent control. But we have more questions, and we're at time. Actually, we're a little over time, but there's so many good questions. So those of you that still have questions, I think we've got in chat, in Zoom anyway, we've got contact information, and if you refer to their website, you can get in touch with them that way too, or worst case, pester me and I'll get you in touch with them, because we do have some other good questions here. But thank you so much, Andy and Alex, for sharing this information, and for everybody that came to learn more, because boy, there's lots of cool stuff to learn about barn owls going on, and more stuff being learned all the time. And thanks to all of you that made donations to help support this so we can keep it free so everybody can learn. And thanks for our moderators and Tristan over in YouTube for helping keep things going over there and send questions over here. And a whole bunch of people are asking, is this going to be recorded and saved? Yes, it will be. So you can find it 2 different ways, along with all of our other saved speaker series presentations. If you go to the International Owl Center's YouTube channel and go to our playlists, you'll find one for the Virtual Owl Expert Speaker Series. So this will be in there. Or you can go to the Owl Center's website under Programs and Virtual Owl Expert Speaker Series, and all of our saved programs are listed there. So it'll be listed there by the end of today. As long as nothing distracts me, we'll get it on there. And the next presentation is Andy and Alex again, as they alluded to, because they have so much cool stuff to talk about. And they're going to be talking about where the owls go, methods and insights from short-eared owl research in Maryland. And again, another species that is not well studied and will be great to hear more about. So thank you very much. We'll see you on Superb Owl Sunday next week, right? Because we need to talk about owls on Superb Owl Sunday. So Andy and Alex, we'll see you next week. And I hope we see a bunch of you in the audience also. Thanks for joining us.